Evening, everyone. We have Daniel Franklin with us. He has come all the way from South Africa. Over 40 years of experience in the field of andrology. And I welcome you here in Udaipur. And he would like to take presentation on sperm analysis as per the WHO guideline. And after that, we will be going through DNA analysis of the sperm and the pregnancy outcome. So I hand over to Daniel Franklin to take it forward.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening. I am very happy to be here. What I saw in your academy is very impressive and a true example of what we should actually be doing in training. I want to discuss you the new guidelines and methodologies that was outlined in the 2010 manual that was published by the World Health Organization. Oh, when I met Louise Brown on her 30th birthday in Sao Paulo, we chatted, amongst other things, about what her birth has caused in the world. You can think of it all, the industries, apparatus, equipment, media, tools that were developed after this scenario took place in the 70s. So I want to just start off with this. The changes in the new manual was basically based on sperm preparation methods and cryopreservation procedure. And the new format also includes all the different working solutions in detail, how the protocol for each of these solutions that we use in our andrology laboratories are defined in detail. That's basically the changes in the manual. We also have a change here in the motility evaluation, which was, according to me, a big benefit for the highly populated infertility clinics. Instead of using the ABCD method of evaluating, we decided to just call it progressive motile, PR, locally motile but non-progressive, NP, and then immotile, or then supposedly dead sperm. You see, this old method of the WHO want a technician to understand the difference between a sperm that swims 25 microns and faster per second from a sperm that swims 20 microns per second. So it's very difficult technique to train the technicians to get a standard operating procedure that is repeatable and reliable and clinically significant. I mean, this is difficult. So the new method is more acceptable and easy to perform. And then assessment of the sperm morphology is done according to the strict criteria method. So strict sperm morphology is now mentioned as WHO morphology instead of strict criteria or strict Tigerberg criteria. Also, a vitally important section in the new manual is how to go about quality control, which should be an important part of the daily semen analysis. Reference values is also mentioned, and it's very important to understand that the reference value refer to fertile men. These were men that were selected over a large group of countries and clinics, 2,000 men, who impregnated their wives without any ART assistance. These men were usually from the antenatal clinics and asked to donate a semen sample. So the reference values are from fertile men. This is for the first time that we have data on the fertile population. What is important, the containers that one should use. Glass is not really acceptable because some men drop the glass at that point when they have ejaculation. Polystyrene, polypropylene, a huge mouth wide opening, and if it can be black, it's better because sperm doesn't like oxygen. Always be cautious to handle semen because they can be hazardous material, viruses inside. Now, if we start with the practical, the wet preparation is the cornerstone of the semen analysis. Now, wet preparation is performed by placing a drop of semen on a microscopic slide, and this is the type of typical operation that should take place. If you use, for instance, a 20 microliter drop, or say 10 microliter droplet, then you cover it with a 22 by 22 cover slip to ensure an area of 480 millimeters square. It provides a chamber depth of 20.7. This is our aim. That allows the sperm to go through all the different steps of motion analysis. If you use a smaller drop, in cases where you have a hypovolemic patient with very small volume, then you cover it with 18 millimeter cover slip to get more or less the same type of scenario. So it's a standard operating so that you always look at the same population or different populations under the same condition. So what do we do? We first observation. What is the goal to achieve with the wet preparation? If there's sperm, you have to observe them, determine the follow-up action. How many sperm are there? Are they moving? Are they not moving? And then you prepare the correct dilution for the counting procedure. I'll explain that after this. How do you do that? You observe whether there's some round cells, whether sperm are agglutinating or just a great aggregation clumps, non-specific agglutination or specific agglutination. Are there debris inside? Are there bacterial protozoa observed? These are all things that you have to report on your report if you can see that. This is non-specific agglutination. Usually these are all dead sperm that are moved together in a clump by the ones that move. So if you check these sperm, they are all immotile and usually dead. Agglutination is a specific action of sperm, like head-to-head agglutination, or clumping like this. And this, if you are familiar with this problem, these two sperms, for instance, are swimming in all crazy directions, but it's still live and moving, but they are bound together by antibodies. And also this clump can move over the field because all the sperm are still alive but clumping together. So we get head-to-head agglutination in one patient, and then you get head-to-tail agglutination in another patient, as well as tail-to-tail agglutination. So these type of agglutinations are all depending on where the antibody is formed against the sperm. This is our typical head agglutination example. So in the 70s, great emphasis was laid on sperm agglutination and sperm antibody. How should we treat that? And how should we identify the specific antibody? So the mixed antiglobulin reaction, the MAR test, was developed in the early days using red blood cells. I was fortunate as a young man those days to do the practical of the MAR test in the laboratory of Professor Jan Kremer. We used red blood cells that were coated with sperm antibodies that were prepared by the hematology laboratory in the city of Groningen in Holland. So we performed that uh, test or developed that test. Here you can see one of the technicians, Professor Kremer. Semen was the director of the laboratory, and I was still a young guy, as you can see, no gray hair. Assessment of motility, we will discuss this. This video didn't work, so it's PR, NP, or IM. The counting chamber that is preferred by the WHO is in Neubau. Now, I know a lot of you will say, oh my goodness, yes. I agree, it's a tedious, troublesome, time-consuming effort. The only reason why they advise us to use this is because you have a double control on your dilution that you make. They prefer to use positive replacement pipettes, but there was this publication that the negative displacement pipette is also giving the same results as the positive one. So it's your choice. The positive displacement pipette is very expensive because the tips are individually used and you cannot reuse or clean them. So the basic principles of morphology is to have a standard operating procedure on your lab information instruction manual. How should we do it? If we look at how this changed over the years, just on morphology, from 80% in 1980 to 4% in 2010. And you can see 50%, 30%, 14, and 4. It's a dramatic change in the morphology values of patients over the years. As this graph will indicate, as from, this is from my colleague Rudolf Minkfeld, done at the Tigerberg Clinic from 88 through to 2006. So you see the morphology came down. The reason why is our evaluation method has changed. In those days, the guys would just look at the sperm head. If the head was quite normal, looking oval shaped, more or less, then they would just classify the sperm as a normal sperm, ignoring the midpiece and ignoring the tail, which is an integral part of the sperm. So to do good morphology, your preparation of the slide is also important. You cannot just plump or drop a bunch of semen on a glass slide and spread the cover slip or whatever method like a blood smear. It's not the way you should do it. The best way to do it is what the WHO advised us to do. It's a so-called feathering method. You put a drop of semen there on the edge of the slide, slide it back a little bit so that it spread over the whole area of this second slide, and then with a slow or fast movement forward as you like it, spread the semen over the whole area. Concentration-wise, if the sperm is less than 20 million, we use 20 to 30 microliter droplet. Then you get more or less 8 to 12 sperm per high power field. That is 1,000 magnification, 100 times 10. If there's more than 30, you change your volume to get the same. Because if you have an overcrowded slide, overlapping sperm, it's not possible to do morphology in an orderly manner. It should be a well-prepared slide. Staining methods recognized and advised. It's these papiliculoi. I don't think there's any laboratory in the world that really uses it. It's a 20-minute job. It must be done in a secluded, safe area. A shore stain, some people still do it. The rapid methods is not recommended, or is recommended by certain groups, but it's not one of the preferred methods by the WHO. I personally use the diff quick method. There's many staining methods available. The pop stain gives good staining of sperm and other cells. That is important. That's the reason why they prefer that. This is an example of a pop stain. You can see it's nice clear. This is a diff quick stain. It's not so clear to see the differences of the aberrations that we have. So this is usually we advise people to take 5 minutes of your time and wash the sperm sample to get rid of the extra seminal plasma. When you get a clean type of morphology, it's impossible to do morphology if this is just a mess of sperm lying on top of each other. It's not possible. Too many cells. You see that it's overlapping. You cannot see the tail or the mid piece. This is a head, two heads on each other. So this is how it should look like, more or less. So the ideal is to practice and to try and find the optimum way of preparing your slide that you can at least report clinical relevant morphology values. Otherwise, you don't have to do morphology. You can just guess what it looks like by eyeballing your wet print. Also important to do morphology on 5 places of the slide, on the 4 corners and the middle, just to avoid that you get a specific population of immotile or abnormal or normal sperm clumped together in one area of the slide. This is just a precaution. The method to classify is the strict criteria method. Now, normally, okay, we think that morphology is a perception. If you were told in the beginning of your career this was a horse, and now you have read the WHO manual and you find out that this horse is actually a frog, by just changing your perception, changing it around, the horse becomes a frog. And so that's the whole idea of teaching morphology and understanding morphology. You can change your perception, what should a normal sperm looks like. So what does a normal sperm look like? It should have a head. It should have a mid-piece, acrosomal area in the head area. It should have be 40 to 70% of the head area. The post-acrosomal region should not contain any vacuum. Any vacuum in the post area is a problem. So you can see all these details are in the manual. I won't waste your time to read it. You can just check it. This is the criteria for normality of sperm. It's criteria, I think, for the first time in the history of morphology for sperm. We have criteria that you can go back to and say, is this an acrosomal defect? Is this a mid-piece defect? Is this a tail defect? Because the criteria said coiled tails, abnormal mid-pieces, and irregular head shapes are abnormal. So what we know is that sperm consists of 3 compartments. The head area should be oval shaped without any aberration, any little abnormalities. It should have a midpiece that is straight, like this one, no aberration, no problem, and a normal tail. This is a normal tail. This is a normal head. You see the definition of a oval shape is the ratio between the length of the head divided by the width should be 1.5 to 1.7. If that ratio is not there, then the head is abnormal, like this head. If you take the head and it's easy to realize this is a perfect normal shaped sperm. Oval shaped, mid-piece is intact, beautiful, and the tail is intact. The same with this one. This one, you don't have to be educated to understand the sperm is abnormal because of the head shape. The acrosome is small, and the mid-piece is attached on the side of the sperm. So this sperm might be swimming, but it will go in circles because the tail is pushing it in one direction. So you will pick this up in your motility evaluation. This is abnormal sperm. You can see this is a typical picture that you will find with men with a testicular stress pattern like varicocele infections or stuff like that, trauma, and you get all these abnormal sperm. It's piriform. Piriform is elongated post-acrosomal area. Supervital staining is done with your eosin-nichrosine stain. It's a one-step stain. You get sperm that takes on the eosin. Those are usually the dead ones, and then the sperm that stay unstained, and they are the live ones. I always remember red is dead and white is alive. So if you look at this example, you can clearly see that this is a dead sperm, non-vital, and this is a live sperm, very much alive. The nichrosine only forms the background so that you can distinguish between the two colors more easily than without the black background. Leukocyte peroxidase test is important to distinguish between your round cell and your polymorphs in the semen, because your sperm sample is classified as leukocytospermia if there's more than a million. That should be more than 1 million sperm per milliliter. It's always, this is the type of report form that the WHO has in its manual. Each clinic has its own form, but I think most of the people have more or less a acceptable technique of reporting, especially reporting your morphology, your motility. It's new, and maybe one should just add a comment about what is important and what is not important. PR ones are the ones that we are interested in, and the immotile ones and the non-progressive ones are the ones that are not really important for any ART treatment that we can apply. This is an important slide that I want to stress. No clinician is entitled to pronounce a verdict on a single semen analysis or sample. Take these two people. The one has 4% normal sperm, the other one has 20%. This guy has 200 million sperm, this has 40 million. 80% progressive, 80% progressive. So both of them have 6.4 million normal motile sperm that can be used in any ART program. So if in the old past tense, people will look at the morphology and say, oh no, this guy is infertile. it only has 4% normal cells. That is incorrect, and your clinical data won't show that. Your clinical data will show that these guys are actually able to achieve a pregnancy with their spouses. So this is an important concept that developed from the new criteria that 4% can be a normal semen sample depending on the concentration and the motility. There was a lot of issues mentioned in the literature that followed the publication of the manual, because some clinics thought or asked the question, are we now shifting the burden of infertility back to the female because our males are now classified as normal? Which is not really intelligent comment to make, because these guys didn't understand that you can work with a semen sample that has a low morphology depending on whatever the concentration motility can be. Okay, thank you so much for your attention.
So we'll change it to the next presentation, which is DNA.
This is our proud colony of king penguins in Cape Town. It's the only colony in the world that still has the king penguin. This is just to show off my beautiful city. Okay, functional parameters of sperm. When I started my career in school, we were taught that fertilization was a process between sperm and oocyte, period. Nobody knew what was going on. Since then, we developed, the world developed a whole bunch of integrate factors involving in the process of fertilization, like chromatin condensation in the testes, the motility of the sperm, the membrane is it alive, is it dead, can it go through the normal steps that I discussed. Morphology is important, capacitation should take place, zona binding should take place, acrosome reaction should be timed, zona penetration after acrosome reaction then is caused by the acrosine activity, binding to the oolemma, inducing the cortical granule reaction, and then we have chromatin decondensation and the forming of your embryo precursors. So DNA integrity is now a focal point in the literature. If we look at this graph here that was supplied by Dr. Vakil, you can see the issues here. The higher the DNA issue, the lower the fertilization and baby rate born in those cases. It's very clear the difference here again. The higher the DNA fragmentation, the poorer the clinical outcome. So DNA fragmentation is a very determining factor in whether you have fertilization, whether you have embryo formation, or even implantation at that point. So the theory is, where does it come from? Basically, improper chromatin condensation is the cause for DNA fragmentation. Then you have this abortive apoptic issues that was published by Dr. Sakas in the late 90s. And then we have oxidative stress that was widely published by John Aitken, Ralph Haker, and Ardeval in those days. Causes, mainly cause also with radiation, chemotherapy, and other external factors. Mechanism of this is oxidative stress, deform your DNA, and you get ionization, radiation problems, base modification, and at the end you have double strand DNA fragmentation if you go through this whole area. The proposed association between DNA fragmentation and the etiology of the disease. I'll just skip this. Is not really what we want to know. This is an important slide published by Dr. Sakas in the Journal of Alpha Embryo Group. You have an abnormal sperm that can fertilize the egg, and it can go through all the steps, blastocyst formation, and then you have a fragmented embryo after a few days. Or it can go further from this area, from this formation, and form a blastocyst, and you can even have an embryo that is apparently normal, and then this embryo can develop, but it has the same problem as the original sperm that was there. So this is an abortion or a miscarriage rather for this type of sperm. So problem is it's confusing because abnormal DNA can go up to a normal embryo, but the problem is this embryo will have the same problem as the original sperm. Maybe this is the way nature tried to prevent the formation of a population of men that has a DNA problem. This was published by Dr. Henkel a few years ago, IVF outcome versus ICSI outcome with fertilization. The tunnel assay was used to determine the DNA fragmentation. And you can see that the fertilization in both cases, in IVF and in ICSI, was basically the same. But if we look at the pregnancy rate, it came down drastically after if the tunnel was more than 36, for instance. The same with ICSI. So now, what tests are we used? That there's so a big variety of DNA tests. The tunnel, the comet, the in situ translation, the SCSA test. You get the fish type of test. Halo sperm comet assays. And then the stains can be aniline blue, toluene blue, chromomycin A. So which of these tests can be used to determine that? Now, the clinical implication is that sperm with damaged DNA can fertilize, we just said that. However, the use of DNA damaged sperm reduces the rate of pre-implantation and further development. That is what we will come back to the test just now. This is sperm DNA damage has a significant impact on this. We know that sperm DNA damage is predictive of fertilization and pregnancy. The use of test systems depend on the personal and financial capability. Some of these DNA tests are very expensive and very time consuming. It takes a technician the whole day to do, for instance, a tunnel assay. And the standardization of the test is lacking. If we look at what the recommendations are by Christopher Barrett and John in fertility and sterility, they think that for sperm DNA assessments to be widespread, effective clinical tool, key objectives need to be urgently achieved. And these include robust standardized methods, systems for training staff and ongoing quality control and rigorous examination of the clinical outcome. If this is achieved, the clinical utility of DNA damage assessment will be fully realized. We don't know which test is really testing DNA damage that occurs in the sperm coming from the testers, or does it occur during the testing period by, for instance, adding culture medium, doing staining processes? Does that not influence your DNA quality at the end? So we don't know these answers. That's why De Jong and Barrett feel that a huge clinical, robust study should be done to get the answers on all these questions. Yeah, just talking about this whole thing, what tests should be done. We can skip this one. Escher recommend a continuation of fundamental research if necessary. Standardization of any current clinical assay is essential. High quality comparative clinical data are lacking. Long-term follow-up of children resulting from assisted is lacking, according to Escher in this publication. Animal models are very useful and can be used in a more widespread manner. So this was the final conclusion made in 2010. Now we are 8 years further away, and we still don't have these answers that were posted on the DNA issue. Now, it's just a correct one. This is the microfluidic. A new method of selecting sperm that's supposed to be DNA intact or non-fragmented sperm. Study done by Dr. Sujata in Chennai, India. This is an interesting study. They use the microfluidic system, which entails a laminar flow of medium through micro channels, microfiber channels, and this causes motile sperm to cross the border where the channel separates because they are motile. The immotile ones haven't got the energy, or the poor motility ones, to go through this laminar flow system. So it bounces back. So what end up, your motile sperm, normal DNA intact sperm, ends up in this little well here that we can see. This is the pilot study that this group did on comparing the double density gradient method of separating or preparing sperm to the microfluidic system. So you can see that the fragmentation index in the beginning, before separation, came drastically down after using the microfluidic system compared to the double density gradient. There was a significant difference between these two end results. So with this data they had, the group decided to test this theory to see whether the microfluidic separated sperm, how do they perform in the ICSI laboratory when they are used after separation. So a prospective analytic study was developed, taking 48 couples who had a previous history of failed ICSI therapy. The microfluidic system was used to prepare the semen sample for ICSI. This was the parameters of the men used. You can see they were quite lengthy in their period of infertility history. Sperm count was good, motility was okay, morphology was very bad, 2% on average. And the post-microfluidic separation DFI value was 33, which was more or less a borderline case, borderline, but still acceptable. Now, if we look at the female profile, 15 of the females had normal ovulatory cycles, 12 were poor responders. The donor oocytes were used in 12 cases. polycystic ovaries syndrome in 5 cases, tumor factors, 1 idiopathic in 1, and the mean average age were more or less 32 years of age. The results, cleavage rate was recorded with 90%, fertilization was 76, and 2 to 3 embryos were transferred on the day 4 or 5 of the cycle. 34 clinical pregnancies were confirmed. 15 patients already delivered, while 14 are still ongoing at this point in time. 2 miscarriages occurred. A total of 27 babies were born, 13 twins and 13 single births. 1 patient delivered triplets. The microfluidic system is a simple, easy to perform, very short time. You need 30 minutes to separate normal DNA intact sperm for your ICSI process. The difference in DFI was significant compared to the double density gradient separation. And you also eliminate the adverse effect of centrifugation during your double density gradient, or any method that you can use that was in the past used were also the double wash swim up, the migration, sedimentation. What all these methods introduce centrifugation, which according to David Mortimer is very detrimental to the sperm, while the microfluidic system does not include centrifugation. It's normal separation of motile sperm. This is our literature, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Daniel, very much for an interesting lecture. We will